All right, you guys. Okay, so let's start our class. Actually, I forgot to ask for the song.
276.
276. All right. 276. Let me put that. 276. All right. And if you could lead prayer, please, thanks. All right, so let me probably turn this off since we're going live there. Probably shouldn't have that up there. Anyway, all right, so let's start our class. We'll open with a word of prayer, and I'll make an announcement, and then we'll get into our class. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the day that you've given us today. Lord, we pray that you would be glorified in this class and all the decisions that we make to try to keep people safe and to just make the wisest decisions we need to make for this trouble and trials that's going on right now. And just we pray that you would guide us, be with us, lead us, help us to follow you as our great shepherd. We pray, Lord, that you be glorified in our Bible study here tonight, and we would learn well, not only for our own equipment, but also so that we might be able to help others. We thank you and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so the announcement that we need to make is that we are going to be closing the building, having no services until April 5th. April 5th. So we won't be having services until April 5th. Okay, with that being said, let's start with our lesson today. We're going to actually spend quite a bit of time in the book of Hebrews. It's funny because you take a look at a lot of the Old Covenant things, and you start to establish the purposes of the Old Covenant and what the what the Old Covenants were there for. The book of Hebrews is an astounding resource for that. And by the way, I don't know if you guys have been able to keep up on Wednesdays or not, or been watching okay, so I don't know how much review I need to do. At any rate, we're going to spend a little time looking at what the point of these covenants were. We've been kind of touching on it every time we talk about something like, Adam and Eve and Noah and Abraham. And as we've been coming closer, we've been all kind of pointing out the fact that all of these things are pointing us to Christ. That's really the culmination of all of it, is to point to Christ. So everything before Christ was looking forward to Christ, and since we've been looking back to Christ, back to the cross. So last week we spent some time talking a little bit about the purposes of the Old Covenant. Sometimes people have this idea that the God of the Old Testament was different than the God of the New Testament. There was a different God, or at least he was different. Whether it was the same God or not, they have this idea that God was somehow different back then than he is now. And as you can see, we looked at last week primarily at the aspect of God from the Old Covenant that talked about love. And the fact that God, we learn in the New Testament that God is love. Okay? And the greatest commandment, Jesus reiterated when he was asked, what is the greatest commandment? The lawyer who kind of cornered him and said, hey, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And I'm sure they thought they were going to trap him or trick him somehow. And he said, the Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And upon these two commandments hangs all the law and the prophets. So, really, sometimes we think that the New Covenant or the Old Covenant, that the only purpose of the Old Covenant maybe perhaps sometimes is to bring us to Christ, in the sense of that there was no other purpose. Like, there are explicit statements in the New Testament that tell us that the Old Covenant, that the law was given because of transgression. So that's an actual statement that we're given. But in reality, if you look at passages like Romans chapter 15, verse 4, it tells us that those things which were written beforehand were written for our learning. That through the patience of the scriptures we might have hope. Okay, so they still have, they're still God's word. They're still God-breathed. They still have value for us to learn a lot of things, like who's God, where did we come from, what, all that, creation, how the creation came about, how God expects people to interact with him, and what God does when people obey him, and what he does when they don't obey him, and all these things that we can learn from the Old Covenant. So it's not just, well, the Old Covenant was, because there are a bunch of sinners and they needed a law. That's part of it, but that's not all of it. It's also to reveal to the people who God is, and the fact that he is love, and all these things. And plus, it also is there to reveal God's standard of righteousness. I mean, if you really think about it, if God is a holy God, then God is going to expect his people to be holy just like he is. As a matter of fact, we have several passages that allude to that. If you call on the Father who judges all without partiality, conduct yourself throughout your time here in fear, Peter says. And he says that we are to be holy, for it is written, I am holy. So this concept of God's righteousness, and who he is, was established through the Old Covenant and is carried on through the New Covenant as well. So part of the Old Covenant, each one of these we've looked at, was to reveal God's standard of righteousness. All right. For example, if you look at Genesis chapter 18 and 19, you'll find that God comes in judgment against Sodom and Gomorrah, which, by the way, is only 4 short chapters after Abraham, who was Abram at that point, went and got Lot back from when he got taken. Okay? And so Lot's living in Sodom and whatever, and he gets taken, and Abraham goes and rescues him. But then all of a sudden, in chapters 18 and 19, we find that there's a cry that God hears from the land of Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plain, and how despicable they've gotten. And the Lord said he's going to go see. I'm going to go see if not that he actually had to put eyeballs on it, but the concept is he came and talked to Abraham, and he says, I'm on my way over here to see if what I'm hearing is true. And it was, of course, and then they destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. The reason they did that, the reason God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, is because God is a righteous God, and they were living completely unrighteous. Their lives were completely opposite of what God expects from his people. All right, so this idea of standard of righteousness is important to understand. So we're going to look at a couple passages. We're going to spend a lot of time in Hebrews when we get there. But we'll just take a look at a few passages. Look at Matthew chapter 3. Matthew chapter 3, and then again in verse 5. Matthew chapter 3, verse 15. Actually, we'll start in verse 13. Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. And John tried to prevent him. And this is an interesting thing if you think about what's happening here. John tried to prevent him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and are you coming to me? Which, of course, if John knew Jesus and who he was, I would be asking the same question. Right? But Jesus answered and said to him, permit it to be so now, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness. And stop and think about why he said that. What does it mean to fulfill all righteousness? What is he talking about there? To fulfill all righteousness. He says, then he allowed him. When he had been baptized, Jesus came up immediately from the water. Behold, the heavens were opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove, alighting upon him. And suddenly a voice came, saying, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Jesus' concern was fulfilling something called righteousness. Right? A little bit later, look at chapter 5, verse 17. A little bit later, Jesus says this, do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. Okay? Perhaps some people were thinking that or saying that or having this idea that Jesus, because he had a different message, that he was trying to destroy what God had revealed earlier. He said, I'm not trying to destroy the law. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. And what is Jesus fulfilling when he says he's going to fulfill the law and the prophets? What's he fulfilling?
What was prophesied.
Right? He's fulfilling the prophecies, right? That's the prophets, the law and the prophets. But what else is he fulfilling?
God's desire. Righteousness.
God's righteousness, God's desire. He's fulfilling the righteous requirements of the law, isn't he? All those things that were required by God in the law are being fulfilled in Christ. That's why they're no longer in force. That's why that covenant, which we're going to see in Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, that's why all of that has become obsolete. Because it's been fulfilled in Christ, who set forth the new covenant. Only Jesus was able to fulfill all righteousness. So this concept of the old law, it was put there to show God's love, to show who he was, to show God's standard of righteousness in which Jesus Christ fulfilled that righteousness, right? It was also to expose sin. The law was to expose sin. In fact, I was reading through Exodus the other day, and I got to thinking, Exodus chapter 12 is where they begin. No, not Exodus chapter 12. Let me get my place. Hang on. Exodus, let me get the chapter right here. Exodus. All right. Exodus chapter 19 is where the law begins to be given. But then as you fast forward through this, you'll see by Exodus chapter 32, I believe it is. Let me double check. Yes. Exodus chapter 32, Moses is up on the mountain, okay? And he's getting the law. What's the purpose of the law? Right? To expose sin. The law was given for transgression, right, in part. Well, here he is. He's getting the law from God. And while he's getting the law from God, what are the Israelites doing down at the base of the mountain?
Transgressing.
They're transgressing. What do they do?
Building golden calf.
They're building the golden calf. Which, by the way, I don't know if you guys know this or not. I don't remember the exact brand or whatever you want to call it of bull. But there was the only animal that the ancient Egyptians actually worshipped was a certain type of bull. Okay, which is why Israel, when they came out, they made this god. It was a calf. It was a bull calf. And the reason why they did that is because they learned the ways of the Egyptians. Okay, so they come out of Egypt, but they've got a lot of baggage, right? So they're coming out, and they're in the middle of all this sin when Moses is up here getting the law. And of course, later on, Moses gets mad because what happens? He breaks the tablets and... Okay, so he grinds up the calf and makes them all drink it. It's pretty bad, isn't it? So you're looking at the law and you think, well, why are these, again, what's the point of this? The reason we're talking about this is because these are the covenants that were set in place. The reason the law, the covenant, the law of Moses was put in place as a covenant, in part, was to expose sin. If you take a look at Romans chapter 3, a couple passages here before we get to Hebrews. Romans chapter 3. Romans chapter 3. Verse 19. For now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and that all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. Okay? So part of the reason why the law was given is so that the people would know what sin is. As a matter of fact, the scriptures tell us that without law, there is no what?
Sin.
There is no sin. There is no transgression. How do you transgress a law you don't have? Okay? if there's no law, you can't break a law. So he's telling them, look, you guys are sinning. In fact, here's where the principle of God, right? The principle, the character of God, and the character of people meet. They really meet in the law, actually, because God in principle and in person can't tolerate unrighteousness, can he? Tells us that there will be no unrighteousness. Unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of heaven, right? So in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9, if that's true, then there has to be something to tell us when we're doing something wrong, isn't it? Okay, that's the purpose of the law. Okay, God is righteous. God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. True or false? That's true. Okay, true. So if God is light, and there's no darkness with him, and there will be no darkness with him in eternity, and people are darkness, but they don't know it, how are they ever going to get to be over here where there's no, unless there's a law given? Okay? So the law was given to expose the sin, to tell them that there's sin, that they are doing things wrong. Okay? Any questions so far? Look at Romans chapter 5. Romans chapter 5. Verse 20, it says, moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound. But where sin abounded, grace abounded much more. So that as sin reigned in death, even so grace might reign through righteousness to eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Okay? Once again, speaking to the idea that the law exposed sin, and it really exposed sin. It abounded. Right? But grace was to come in Jesus Christ. But it comes through what? What does it say? Through righteousness. Okay? It doesn't just come because God says, you know what? I'm tired of holding people accountable, so I'm just going to extend my grace to everybody. Is that what God has done? You know, there was the law, and then Malachi, which, by the way, you know what here's a quick trivia question. What is the last word in the book of Malachi?
End.
Huh? End. No. It's curse. Okay? That's the very last word in the book of Malachi is the word curse. All right? Now, what's funny, the reason why I mention that is because Jesus Christ took on the curse of mankind. Jesus Christ is the righteousness of God. Right? So that being the case, grace is able to abound to man because Jesus accomplished that goal, correct? Okay, that being the case, how does a person apply that to their lives? How do they become partakers of that righteousness?
Through obedience.
Through obedience. That's the thing. That's right. Jesus tells us that sin abounded, grace abounds all much more, and it all focuses on Jesus Christ, right? And what's the point here we're trying to make? The fact that everything that existed beforehand, everything, was to point us to Christ. And all of that would be fulfilled in Jesus Christ, and that the righteousness that's in Jesus Christ can be had by us and by the world, the grace of God, which allows us to be partakers of the righteousness of Christ through obedience, right? Because if we're not obedient to Jesus, which we're going to see once again in the book of Hebrews, is all leading up to the book of Hebrews, all right? Which Wendell is doing a very good job on Sunday mornings. I just don't happen to have this here. and so it's we're going to get a little bit of a second wind of it. All right, so all these things are being fulfilled in Jesus Christ, all right? Galatians chapter 3, verses 24 and 25, we don't have to go there, tells us that the law was given as a schoolmaster, right? I actually like that term better than I do tutor, right? Because a tutor is a person who just teaches you something, right? If you're getting tutored for math, you know, you're not really being led anywhere. You're being taught something. Well, the schoolmaster actually had the responsibility of taking children from their place to school. They were leading them to something to be taught, actually, at the school. So the schoolmaster is to lead people to something, in this case Jesus Christ, to be taught by Jesus Christ, right? Schoolmaster, much better word. So the law was a schoolmaster to bring us to Christ, who fulfills the prophecies all the way from Genesis chapter 3, Deuteronomy 18:18, talking about a prophet like unto Moses, right? Bringing us towards the Christ. Now, that point being made, I want to emphasize the superiority of Christ over all the old covenants, all that stuff. Because what's going to happen next in our study, the next phase of our study in the study of hermeneutics, is to look at the contrastings in the covenants. In other words, why is the new so much better? That's the next step. We looked at all the old stuff. Why is the new so much better? And then we're going to start moving into some of the other things, such as literary style and all that kind of stuff, which is going to help us understand how to understand when Jesus says something like, I am the door. Okay? In fact, I was just talking to Kaylee about this. Jesus was not saying he's made out of wood, he's a flat panel, it's got a door handle. No. He's saying he is the way. Another way he said it was, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. I am the door. Okay? That's not a literal statement. How do we know that? Well, first, common sense tells us that. But if you didn't have that, which a lot of people may not have that right now, okay? You look at the literary style. What is that? That's a metaphor. Okay? So that's the other stuff we're going to start looking at. That kind of thing. That's how we know how we can understand what reading and how to interpret it properly. Okay, so a couple passages. Look at Jeremiah 31. In fact, Jeremiah 31 is the prophecy I want us to put our eyes on that is reiterated exactly in Hebrews chapter 8, which we're going to spend some time looking at in a few minutes. Jeremiah 31, beginning in verse 31, says, now, by the way, if we properly understand the scriptures, okay, the number one rule when it comes to prophecy is to see if anybody in the New Testament, as the inspired writers, have applied that prophecy. Okay? For example, Joel chapter 2 made a prophecy of the Lord saying, I'm going to pour out my spirit on all flesh. Right? Your sons and your daughters. Remember that? Well, Acts chapter 2, what happened? Right? The Spirit gets poured out, right? Well, people, if they look at that and they realize they want to go to that and say, see, everybody's going to get the Holy Spirit in the miraculous way, or everybody's going to be baptized in the Holy Spirit, right? They draw these conclusions. The problem is, if you follow the pronouns through the text, you find out exactly who it applied to, and you find out that Peter is telling the people who were saying they were drunk because they were speaking in other tongues, no, they're not drunk as you suppose, but this is the prophecy of Joel, who said, he didn't say prophecy of Joel, but he said this is as a prophet, who said, this is what, and then he quoted Joel chapter 2. So Peter took the prophecy of Joel and applied it specifically to what was happening on the day of Pentecost. So we can know what Joel meant, right? Isn't that the way it works? We know what Joel meant because Peter applied it. Okay, so Jeremiah chapter 31 is a prophecy, we're going to read it, that is applied in Acts chapter 8. We're going to read that too. Okay? Paul makes the application of this prophecy, and it's very important because a lot of people who are Zionists and these people who believe that Jerusalem still has significance today in God's overarching plan and the church's plan B because Jesus failed and all these other things that they come up with, they look at this passage and say, look, God said he's going to make a covenant with Judah and Israel, and he hasn't done that yet. Okay? Let's read this. Look. Jeremiah 31:31. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Now, if you stop right there and you take that literally, you would have to say that the new covenant that is being talked about right here has to be a different covenant. One of two things. It either has to be a different covenant than the one Jesus established, or the one Jesus established only applies to Judah and Israel. Right? If you take it literally, that's the way you have to understand that. Because he said, I'm going to make a new covenant with who?
Israel and Judah.
Israel and Judah. Okay, you can't go applying it literally here and figuratively at the same time. You can't do that. It's either literal or it's figurative. And it means something different. Okay? Make sense? All right. The days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, though I was the husband to them, says the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my law on their minds and write it in their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. No more shall every man teach his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, which, by the way, is the idea back in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Teaching your children and your grandchildren and putting in the frontlets and all that kind of stuff. That's what he's talking about. Saying you had to be taught this stuff. Whereas the new covenant is going to be different. Okay? He says, For they shall know me from the least of them to the greatest, says the Lord. I will forgive their iniquity, and their sins I will remember no more. What he's saying is, it's going to go from a law of stone and tablets to the law of the new covenant, which is written in the hearts of man. Okay? So, when we look at this prophecy, which, by the way, this is an excellent case study when it comes to hermeneutics. Because we can look at this and go, well, wait a minute. Is this... Because Jeremiah, when was Jeremiah written? Approximately, roughly.
Long time ago.
Yes, it was written roughly a long time ago. No, Jeremiah, okay, was written about the time of the Babylonian captivity. Okay? So, was there time left for, remember, Jeremiah wrote about the captivity. Daniel, if you remember, reading the book of Daniel, Daniel was reading Jeremiah and said, wait a minute, the 70-year period that Jeremiah was talking about is about to be fulfilled, okay? So Jeremiah is talking about this 70-year captivity, which happened in, 605 BC? Started somewhere in that area? Okay? There was time between then and the establishment of the church, or even if you want to look at the birth of Jesus Christ, however you want to look at that, doesn't really matter. There was 600 years where this covenant that he's talking about could have been fulfilled in a different way. Okay? Or that it hasn't been fulfilled yet. And that's what a lot of people are looking at. A lot of people are thinking, this is not fulfilled yet. They're saying, no, this is some future covenant God's going to make with Israel and Judah. It says Israel and Judah, Israel and Judah. Which means what they're doing is they're taking this passage literal. Right? Now, here's the problem. Look at Hebrews chapter 8. Hebrews chapter 8. Okay. The book of Hebrews was written somewhere around 67 AD-ish. Something like that. My time frame might be a little bit off. Doesn't really matter. The point is, written after the establishment of the church, the new covenant, and it's being applied to this new covenant. And the book of Hebrews, if you read the entire book of Hebrews from chapter 1 to chapter 13, and you study all through it, you could take one word as a synopsis of the entire book, and that is better. Okay? The covenant of Jesus Christ, the new covenant of Jesus Christ, is superior to the old. Superior than the angels. He's superior. He's better than them in name. He's better than them in position. He's better than in every way. Okay? And it's all being applied to Jesus Christ. So, when we're done reading this, you're going to see that either this prophecy of Jeremiah 31 is to the new covenant and was fulfilled in Jesus Christ, which is what we're talking about, all these things being fulfilled in Jesus Christ, or it's not, and it's yet to be fulfilled. Okay? Let's read it. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 6. It says this, in verse 6, it says, but now he obtained, he being Jesus Christ. Okay? Again, before this is talking about the establishment of the high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Okay? But now he has obtained a more excellent ministry, inasmuch as he is also mediator of a better covenant, which was established on better promises. Who are we talking about? Who is he? Who is this person who established the new covenant? Jesus. How do we know that?
Well, it talks about he is the mediator.
Okay. How do we know you're talking about Jesus Christ?
Somewhere or another, he's referred to as the mediator.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you look at verse 22 of chapter 7, it says, by so much more Jesus has become a surety of a, what? Somebody read that. Chapter 7, verse 22.
So much the more also Jesus has become the guarantee of a better covenant.
A better covenant, right? What's he talking about here in verse 6? That he has obtained a more excellent ministry as much as he had mediator of a what? Better covenant. Talking about Jesus Christ. It's the same context. Saying the same thing. Which was established on better promises. For if that first covenant had been faultless, what's he talking about? Talking about the law of Moses. Talking about the priesthood of Aaron. That whole system. He's saying, if that whole system had been faultless, there would be no reason to look for a better or new covenant, right? So he says, there would have been no place to be sought for a second, but because finding fault with them, he says, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord. Now listen, this ought to be familiar. He says, when I make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Hold on, didn't we just read that? Jeremiah chapter 31, beginning in verse 31. What's going on here? Paul, the writer of Hebrews, is applying the prophecy of Jeremiah to whom? To Jesus. To Jesus Christ and the better covenant that he established. Okay? Now, he says, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand and led them out of the land of Egypt, because they did not continue in my covenant, I disregarded them, says the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my laws in their mind and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. None of them shall teach his neighbor, and none of his brothers, saying, know the Lord. For they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more. In that he says, a new covenant, he has made the first, what?
Obsolete.
Obsolete. What does that mean?
No good.
No good. What does it mean when something becomes obsolete?
Outdated.
Useless. It's outdated. It's bygone. So, in the study of hermeneutics, we see two things here. One, we see that all of the old covenant was pointing to Jesus. It was fulfilled in Jesus. And having been fulfilled in Jesus, all the old covenant has been made obsolete. Okay? And two, we see that the prophecy of Jeremiah, following the proper interpretive rules of hermeneutics, cannot be seen in any other way other than applying to the new covenant of Jesus Christ. Okay? So, whoever Israel and Judah are, whoever they are in the prophecy, they've got to be the church. It's got to be the church. Why? Because the new covenant, being in Jesus Christ, is the church, isn't it? Those who are partakers of the new covenant are what? Christians. Christians make up what? The church, right? So Judah and Israel, in this context, has to be talking about the church. Because if you look at the prophecy, and this is the point I wanted to get across with this passage. If you look at the original prophecy, if you didn't have the New Testament, you didn't have the direct application, I could see somebody saying, well, I wonder if God was planning on creating a covenant with them later on. You might have that question in your mind. You might say, well, maybe Israel has some significance as far as God's plan, right? That ambiguity could be there. But when you have a direct quotation of that passage, which uses the word Israel and Judah, and applies it to the covenant of Jesus Christ, the partakers of which are called the Jerusalem or the Israel of God, or the church, right? Or Christians, or saints, right? It's all applying to this same thing. Okay? We may have known that. You may look at this and say, yeah, I know that. But the thing is, when we study hermeneutics, this is where this tool becomes very important and helps us to see clearly the scriptures.
But the book of Hebrews was mainly written to the Jews. The Israel and the Judah. Okay, and if it was mainly written to the Jews,
Let's clarify that though.
Jewish Christians.
Jewish Christians.
Okay.
Very important difference.
But again, their background being that they're Israel and Judah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
They had an old covenant. It's not saying that this new covenant doesn't apply to all.
Correct.
He's saying to the Jews that have become Christians, hey, that covenant that was given to Judah and Israel, which we're a part of, is now new. It applies to us.
That's right.
And as we were studying last quarter with Peter, it tells them that, hey, you guys had this.
Yeah, the promises came through them. Yeah.
But that doesn't make you any better.
Right.
Everybody has to be obedient the same way. So
That's right. That's why Peter said when the Gentiles received the Holy Spirit, what did he say? He said that I can see that we are going to be saved in the same manner as they. In other words, like Paul says in Romans, the gospel is the power of God and salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek, right? So the thrust of the book of Hebrews is to the Jewish Christians, but there's no different church for the Jewish Christians as there is the Gentile Christians. They're all the same. So what my point is, in saying this, is that you have the church of Christ, right? The church. There is no segregation in the church of Christ, is there? No. There's Jews, Gentiles, slave, free, barbarian, Scythian, male, female. They're all in the same church together. Black, white, purple, pink, polka dotted. Doesn't matter. All in the same church. My point in getting this across is that there is nothing else coming. There's no new covenant. There is no pact with Israel that's supposed to be in God's. There is none of that. It's all done. It's all fulfilled in Jesus Christ. It's all here. That's why Jesus, by the way, speaking to this idea of the Jewish aspect of this, that's why Jesus told them, you apostles are going to be endowed with power from on high. And when you are, I want you're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem. That's the epicenter. Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the world. Okay? So they're going to go from there out. And that's where it's going to grow. So yes, it's definitely beginning with the Jews, but whatever he tells the Jewish Christians applies to the Gentile Christians. There's no difference. There's no two laws. And by the way, the reason why I want to emphasize this is because there are people out there who will teach you that Paul, let me start this way. Peter taught in Acts chapter 2, verse 38, what the Jewish Christians had to do to be saved. And Paul taught what the Gentile Christians had to do to be saved. And therefore they had two gospel messages that put them into the same church. It's insane. Okay? There is only one gospel. There's only one faith. There's only one. Not two. There's only one. Okay? And that's the reason why I'm taking time to kind of emphasize this. Because yes, that was written to the Jews, but they were written to the Jewish Christians. And whatever was written to the Jewish Christian is applied to any other Christian as well. Okay? So it's important to get that point across. All right? Because ultimately, it's all about Jesus Christ. And really, that's the point that we're trying to make right now. The point of the matter is, all the old, everything that was before, was pointing to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the fulfillment, the culmination, the focal point, the embodiment, the whatever you want to call it, of human history and God's plan for salvation. And in Christ, you no longer have the two. You used to have Jew and Gentile, right? And you had the temple, and you had the Jews could be in this part, but the Gentiles had to be out here mingling out in this outside area, right? They had separation. They had segregation. But when Jesus died, what happened to that veil? It was torn, not just to rend the separation between God and the Jews, but also God and the Gentiles. Everyone. That's why the scriptures tell us that in Christ there is no Jew or Gentile, or slave or free, or barbarian or Scythian, or male or female, or none of that stuff. But we are all one in Him. Because that's the whole point. That's the whole gist of really all the scriptures. So look at Hebrews chapter 9. So Hebrews chapter 8, verses 6 to 13 is a direct quotation of Jeremiah 31. Jeremiah 31 is prophesying of that day where there'd be this new covenant. And then in chapter 9, which, by the way, there's other details that we could look at, but chapter 9, verse 15. Well, we'll actually go ahead and start reading in verse 11. In verse 11, it says, Christ came as high priest of the good things to come, with the greater and more perfect tabernacle, dwelling place, not made with hands, that is not of this creation, not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood he entered the most holy place. That's what we just talked about. The most holy place was that place in the temple that was guarded by that veil, remember? Okay? He entered the most holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. For if the blood of bulls and goats, once again, this is the contrast. If the blood of bulls and goats could have done the job, you wouldn't have needed Christ. In chapter 8, if there was no fault in the first one, you wouldn't be looking for a second one. Okay? So that's kind of the point. He says, in the ashes of a heifer sprinkling in the unclean sanctifies for the puring of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? And for this reason, he is the mediator. How many times have we seen that so far? At least 3 times. Of the new covenant by means of death for the redemption of the transgression under the first covenant, that those who are called may receive the promise of eternal inheritance. Okay? For where there is a testament, there must of necessity be the death of the testator. For a testament is enforced after men are dead, which, by the way, tells us when the New Testament was put in force. It wasn't on the cross. It wasn't with the thief. No, it was after he was dead. This new covenant was put in place. He says, for a testament is enforced after men are dead, since it has no power at all while the testator lives. Last thing I want to get across before we end our class is, let me see here. Let me find the passage. Let's see here. Let me go back. Chapter 5. Yes, chapter 5. Go back to chapter 5 with me. Hebrews chapter 5. Verse 5. So also Christ, okay? What the contrast, once again, is between the Aaronic priesthood and the priesthood of Christ. He says, so also Christ, just as Aaron didn't glorify himself to be high priest, so also Christ did not glorify himself to become high priest. But it was he who said to him, you are my son, today I have begotten you. As he also says in another place, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek, who in the days of his flesh, talking about Jesus, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear, though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered, and having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him, called by God as high priest according to the order of Melchizedek, of whom we have much to say and hard to explain since you have become dull of hearing. So notice what he says. He says, we become, that Jesus Christ, even though he was a son, he learned obedience. And in that, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who, what?
Obey him.
And what did you say earlier? How do we partake of Christ's righteousness? Through obedience. The only way we're going to be able to do that, and think about the common sense of that conclusion. What is righteousness?
Doing the will of God.
It's doing what's right, isn't it? It's doing what's right, and of course, doing what's right in accordance with God, with His will. So if we're going to be considered righteous, then we have to do what Christ did, in the sense of, John tells us, anyone who says he abides in him must also, what? Walk just as he walked. Okay? In other words, if Jesus walked in righteousness, we have a requirement to walk in righteousness. We have a requirement to be obedient to him. All right? And what's important about that is this idea that people have this idea that you don't have to obey. It doesn't matter what you believe or do or whatever, as long as you believe in Jesus, and this kind of idea. The problem is, scriptures don't bear that up. The scriptures tell us that he was our propitiation and fulfilled all the righteous requirements of the law so that we could partake of his holiness so long as we obey him. He became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. That's as simple as it gets. That kind of knocks the argument out of the way, that we don't have to be obedient to God, or our righteousness doesn't matter. Okay? Anyway, my time is up. Any questions? Okay, so when we come back, we're going to start looking at let's see here. We're going to start looking at what is, let me make sure I got this outlined right so I don't say the wrong thing. The fundamental differences between the old and the new laws. So that's where we're going to start looking. What's the old law, or the old law and the new law? What are the fundamental differences? And the reason why that's important when it comes to an interpretation of the scriptures is for the very reason we just looked at in Jeremiah 31. That's old law, isn't it? But if you understand that in the light of the new law, and you see how it's framed and where it's applied, you can understand what that was saying better. That's kind of what we're going to be getting at. All right? Anything else? I want to say I'm going to go ahead and announce it again, that we will not be meeting here at the building until April 5th, okay, which is a Sunday, I believe. Okay, so Sunday, April 5th, will be the next time we're all meeting together at the building, okay? And if you could spread the word, that would be good. If there's nothing else, then we'll hand it over to the song leader, and we'll close with a song and a prayer.